Another area that you can draw on for support in your speeches are analogies. Analogies can increase understanding, but they're different than definitions. They don't just define a term, they help someone understand a term through comparison and contrast. There are a couple of different kinds of analogies that are available to you. The first is a literal analogy, where you compare two things from similar classes. You may say a baseball is like a basketball in that it is round, but different from a basketball in that it has stitching prominent on the outside of it. And then there's another kind of analogy you use, a figurative analogy. A figurative analogy compares two things that at first appear to have nothing in common with each other. They're not in the same class. This would be the kind of analogy that Jesus often employed. The kingdom of heaven, that's in a class all by itself, is like a treasure in a field. Now that's a whole different class. And at first the two seem incongruent. But Jesus relates the valuable aspect of that treasure in the field, that you sell everything to buy the field, not just the treasure, but buy the field so you can get to the treasure that's in the field. That is how valuable the kingdom of heaven is. And so he makes this very powerful analogy between the kingdom of heaven and a treasure in a field, or a pearl of great price, that when the two things are in completely different classes from each other. If you're going to use analogies, there's a checklist in the book, chapter 8.4c, where you can go over a checklist for analogies. It asks you if the analogy has a clear purpose within the context of the speech. Is it easily understood? Is it easily visualized? Is it original? Is it colorful? Is it something that your audience is going to be drawn into? Another area of support that you can use, and probably the most common area of support in these kind of speeches, is statistics. Now, statistics are used to clarify and strengthen our claims. They express the seriousness of a situation or the magnitude of a problem. But there are a couple of rules you need to keep in mind when you're using statistics. First of all, don't use a statistic that you don't understand. If you don't know what the mean is, if you don't know what the word mean means, look it up. If you don't know what the difference between a mean or range or median or mode, you need to make sure you understand those concepts before you use percentages that draw on those concepts, or use statistics. Another is percentage. A percentage is a type of statistic. You need to understand what a percentage means. And so don't use a type of statistic that you don't understand. Be sure that you completely grasp the statistic, or you'll never be able to share the value of it with your audience. Also, it's easy for unethical speakers to use numbers to fool their crowd. You can take factual information and come at it from a biased direction and distort the truth, or even leave out significant things. So when you're using statistics, use them ethically. Use them in a way that is not intended to fool your audience, but a way that's intended simply to reinforce what you're saying. The next thing about statistics, and this is incredibly important, statistics are best when you can convey them visually. That's the key to clarity. Listen, numbers are hard to follow without a visual representation. Whenever somebody stands in front of you and they start spouting out a bunch of numbers, it's real easy to get lost in the numbers. It's real easy to get lost in the data. But if they put up a chart or a map or some other visual representation, all of a sudden it's easy to comprehend and understand and apply the statistical data to the subject at hand. Chapter 8, Section 5E has a checklist in it about statistics. That's going to ask you if statistics are representative of what you claim they measure. Are you being honest in your use of statistics? Are you sure they're coming from a reliable source? Have you interpreted them correctly? Are you using them sparingly? Don't overuse statistics, because it'll put your audience to sleep in a heartbeat. And have you explained the statistics creatively? This is part of the visual part and part of the way you talk about it. Taking numbers and making them interesting is a it's a challenge sometimes. If you can do it, it's a skill that is highly valuable. If you've got statistics that use decimal points, have you rounded them off so that it's easier for your audience to understand? Are you using a visual aid? Have you provided a context for the statistics? Are they clarifying and enlightening rather than confounding and confusing your audience? And finally, and this is important, are my statistics complete and current? Current is important. If your statistics are not current, if you're citing the Pew Research Forum Study of Religiosity in America from 2015, then you need to tell that so that the audience understands that this data is a few years old and it may have the circumstance may have changed since then. There may even be newer data available. Pew Research Forum does their surveys on an annual basis, but you may not be able to find the most recent data. You don't have to have last year's data, but you do need to let your audience know how old the data is, whether or not it's current or whether or not it's got some age on it. Finally, you can use testimony to support your speech. Expert testimony is testimony provided by sources that are recognized as authorities on your topic. Remember last chapter, earlier in this lecture today, we talked about interviewing credible sources, sources that are authoritative on the subject. We used Dr. Runk as an example of talking about the value or strength of a good academic program. And so when you cite something he says, you're citing expert testimony. When you cite an expert, and you need to, first of all, establish their reputation. You need to tell, Dr. Runk is the academic dean. He has this many years of teaching experience. He has these credentials. That enhances your credibility as well as the credibility of your speech. And then also you need to make sure that if you're using an expert testimony, that expert is cited on your works cited page. Every speech that uses authoritative sources, any of the sources we talked about, or even other sources like literary sources that back up what you're saying, any kind of fact claim has to be backed up by a credible source, and credible sources have to be listed in a works cited document or page and in this class, whenever you're posting the link to your speech from here forward. Now, this last speech, you didn't have to have sources, but from here forward, when you're posting the link to your speech, if you're using any type of source data to back up your claim, you need to list the works cited whenever you post the speech, either immediately when you paste the link in, just enter down and enter it there, copy and paste from a Word document, or you can put it in as the first comment underneath. But I need to be able to see that you are using sources, that you are citing them properly, and then whenever you cite them in the body of the speech, you need to make sure that you make it known where this information comes from. Use the pattern I talked about earlier, where you're very specific in the beginning, and then the next time you reference it, you're a whole lot more general. Now, there's another kind of testimony you can use that you don't have to cite in a works cited page. That's what's called peer or lay testimony. And that's the opinions of people who are not necessarily authorities on the subject, but may have some experience with the subject. They're ordinary people that have a first-hand experience with the thing that you're dealing with. Their testimony gives more personal insight. Their testimony helps you share feelings and reactions and knowledge of individuals who've been there and had their hands on it, know what they're talking about. Those are very valuable testimonies, but you don't have to cite them in your works cited page. You can just say, according to Samantha, who is my roommate, this and this and this and this. And you don't have to then list them in your works cited. I hope that clarifies some things about gathering supporting data and helping support your speech. All of this is about being able to make a persuasive argument, being able to convey information in a credible way. And if you're going to do that, it's got to be more than just, well, I think this or I say this. You need to have some things to back up your claims. And so you need to be able to research every speech is going to involve some research. Every speech is going to involve some sources that you're drawing from that you can cite. And every speech, if it's going to be credible, is going to have to use that data to back up your fact claims. God bless you. I hope you have a great week. I'll see you here next week, same time, same place. The only thing that's going on this week is reading the chapter, watching these lectures, and participating in the discussion post. And that's the way it's going to be for a week or two here as we get ready, geared up for the next speech. But we want to give you all the fundamentals for a speech before we get there. So that's what this is about. God bless you. You have a great day.